Poetry. According to a definition in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, poetry is writing that formulates a concentrated imaginative awareness of experience in a language chosen and arranged to create a specific emotional response through meaning, sound, and rhythm. Language, beyond the words and their sound verbalization, can also be physical, as in body language, musical, like one finds in a sonata, or visual, as one experiences in a film. In reality, cinema is a medium with a particular language, one which also resorts to meaning, sound, and rhythm through its narrative, soundtrack, and montage, to attain an emotional or intellectual response from the viewer. Hence, cinema has a claim on poetry too, and in fact, the term poetic cinema has been inputted for quite some time now to those films that in their unique and personal offer appear at odds with the traditional rules of filmmaking, fiercely resisting categorization, whilst awakening something ineffable and unnameable, but deeply familiar to the viewers that come across those types of works. The 1931 film Limite, from Brazilian author Mário Peixoto, is perhaps one of the earliest and certainly one of the most astonishing such examples of filmmaking, an unfettered and authentic work of art in which the artist has generously and quite bravely poured his soul, having laid his innermost self completely bare, a staggering display of unconditional vulnerability, acting as a key to open the door for the room in which his most intimate secrets are held, therefore becoming a work of personal self-exposure hitherto unseen in the whole of Seven art. Mário Peixoto was a Brazilian author, a novelist, poet and screenwriter, remembered today mostly for his remarkable and early incursion into filmmaking, named Limite, the Portuguese word for limit. Brazilian cinema industry as of today is quite well known internationally, with plentiful overseas box office and critical successes, which in the minds of most people is easily recognized through films such as City of God, Elite Squad or Carandiru, whereas viewers who have further explored the country's output throughout the preceding decades will be familiar as well with the works of Nelson Pereira dos Santos, Glauber Rocha, Walter Ugori, or Rui Guerra, to cite some of its most renowned directors. Although Peixoto may not have an extensive directorial career as those men, his only feature film is considered by many to be the single greatest film ever made in Brazil, and hence its status in the country's cinematic history is second to none. Despite having written more than a handful of other screenplays after Limite, he never got the chance to bring these to the screen, having faced multiple unsurmountable obstacles and resistance of different sources and natures, yet the legendary stature of Limite has followed him during his life and remains so still today. The film was never commercially exhibited, explaining perhaps its unusual, lonely survival in a single nitrate print, since Mário Peixoto's work was coldly received by the critique upon its initial private exhibition at the Chaplin Club in 1931, the largest cinema club of the era, whose habitual guests comprised poets, cinephiles, musicians, and other artists and dandies. According to Peixoto, however, during this first screening, a large portion of the audience stood up for an ovation after the end, and the spontaneous discussion that arose shortly afterwards eventually delved into an actual brawl. While some approved it as pure cinema, lauding its rhythmic power and the sensibility displayed through many of its cinematic features, others complained of having too much water and an excess of nature, whilst clearly misinterpreting the story and erroneously describing it as a love triangle with a man, his wife and mistress lost at sea, although the three characters are strangers and unrelated to each other. The film, however, was positively appraised on a later exhibition in 1942 by Maria Falconetti, the star actress of Dreyer's seminal The Passion of Joan of Arc, and by Orson Welles, who had come to the country to shoot It's All True, an exhibition that was marked by a lofty but electrifying concentration by the audience during the entire screening, according to Vinícius de Moraes, famous Brazilian poet and lyricist, and a film critic at the time too. Although Orson Welles is said to have been drunk and to have slept through half of the screening, he reportedly described it as impressive nevertheless, and this, together with the fact that American actor John Carradine is said to have taken a copy of the film to England in 1937, and the apocryphal positive comments published in a magazine by Pudovkin, Eisenstein, and Edward Tice, which were later admitted to have been fabricated by Peixoto himself, have nonetheless helped establish Limite's grand reputation. Surprisingly, Peixoto's only cinematic creation was almost lost forever, since by 1959 its only surviving print had deteriorated so much that it could not even be screened, due to less than favorable storage conditions and careless handling of the material. Not only that, but the print got seized by the federal police in 1966, shortly after the coup that marked the beginning of the troubled period of Brazil's right-wing military dictatorship, a confiscation justified by the fact that the film used to be exhibited together with Pudovkin's Mother and Eisenstein's battleship Potemkin in the National Faculty of Philosophy, two notorious communist revolutionary films that will be examined in later videos. Through the initiative of Professor and cinephile Plínio Susskind de Rocha, and with Saulo Pereira de Melo's unwavering dedication and persistence, a close friend of Mário Peixoto, the print was retrieved, and its restoration could proceed, with individual frames having underwent photographic reproduction, which was finalized by 1971, although one scene was not able to be salvaged and had to be substituted by a screen title. The most recent version is based on this restoration and comprises the copy exhibited in the USA in 2010, as well as the DVD and Blu-ray issued by Criterion in 2017. A glacial shiver that no peak Brazilian summer could ever ameliorate suddenly slides down one's spine just by considering that this masterwork could have discreetly vanished and ended up irredeemably lost. In historical terms, the production of experimental movies in the early period of the medium by the hand of Brazilian artists is mainly represented by three films, the first being Nothing But Time by Alberto Cavalcanti, a 1926 silent film of documentary purpose, albeit structured in a singular framework, whose premise features the life of the city of Paris during a single day. Then there is São Paulo, a metropolitan symphony, a creation of 1929, whose urban panegyric nature draws inspiration directly from the more famous film by German director Walter Ruttmann called Berlin, Symphony of a Metropolis, all of these being works who would find in Dziga Vertov's Man with a Movie Camera the most enduring example of such stylistic construct. Finally, one is left with Peixoto's Limite, acknowledged as one of the first experimental films in Latin America, a film that took the metaphorical and creative depiction of contemporary life into a much more personal, philosophic, and subjective level of awareness that showcased the pure experience of an individual, wholly unlike the aforementioned films, hence displaying a pioneering approach that took advantage of the aesthetic and montage techniques available then, not simply to evoke detached responses to abstract stimuli, but through them to effectively craft a journey of seductive persuasion and unparalleled affective power. So, who was this man, this artist and filmmaker possessing a grand reputation in his native country, but rarely mentioned abroad, despite the undeniable ingenuity of his single magnum opus of a film? A sensitive author and poet characterized by a soulful and somewhat existential discourse in his many works, he was said to be born in 1908, although even his specific date of birth, much like Limite, has been the subject of discussion and speculation. Regardless of the exact day and month, his birth in 1908 means that he was around 23 years old by the time he conceived this unique work in the history of filmmaking, displaying incredible artistry in a very early phase of his life, not unlike Jean Vigo, the virtuous and brilliant French director who had found his untimely demise in 1934 at mere 29 years of age. Peixoto has been described during his life as an extremely reserved loner, an introvert, and mysterious man by nature that took pleasure in blending reality and fiction, and was suspected by some to be homosexual, an uncomfortable subject to him which was never officially disclosed. He was well acquainted with silent cinema and had a particular fondness for German filmmakers, especially the great F.W. Murnau. He was also fascinated by Eisenstein's works, the dexterity of his montage, and of other Soviets, and by Charlie Chaplin as well, recognizing his poetic sensibility and directorial expertise. On the other hand, he abhorred the avant-garde, as exemplified by L'Âge d'Or or Le Chien Andalou, films that were frequently on the receiving end of his acerbic and sarcastic diatribes. Interestingly, the catalyst for his creative strain in the world of cinema was rooted in a single picture, the cover of an edition of the influential View magazine, a sort of proto-photojournalistic weekly featuring photographs in essay form that displayed the picture of idiosyncratic Hungarian photographer André Kertész which he came across with in a shop window one day while wandering in Paris after a row with his father. Peixoto, belonging to a wealthy family, had traveled to and lived in England with his father, so he could better acquaint himself with the cinematic novelties debuting in London and Paris, although the relationship between both was not always smooth. Exactly there and then, upon witnessing that woman with the cuffed hands of a man in front of her, a picture of a sea of fire and of a woman holding on to a shipwreck fragment suddenly emerged in his mind, whilst the photograph remained echoing in his head for the rest of the day. On the same night of the encounter, he scribbled the very first scenes of the film, seemingly unaware of what he was doing, jotting down assorted scenes and images in no sequential order, ceasing only after dawn, exhausted from the sudden burst of inspiration. In several occasions, he referred to the sense of extreme limitation felt by the image and how that impression provided the title for his project. The film was made possible using personal funds and with the help of acquaintances, after he was advised by two other filmmakers to bring the project to life by his own volition and hands. Several of the actors were personal friends of Peixoto, many of whom described the friendly, cooperative and tranquil atmosphere on set. 4 cameras were used, as well as towers, dollies and wooden tracks, with Peixoto displaying a perfectionist approach to the mise-en-scène, often requiring seemingly insignificant changes in the scene, such as having the plant leaves or branches to bow in the best way for the picture composition, requests that were promptly and patiently indulged by talented and experienced director of photography Edgar Brasil. Meanwhile, he provided rigorous direction for the film's cast as well, notable for its measured, restrained performances, something atypical for the period and which shall be mentioned again later. The outcome naturally could be nothing short of unique, and Vinicius de Moraes has rendered with beautiful wording the impression one gets upon watching the film. Never before has a film presented itself as so full of meaning, of expression, of things to say without saying anything, without ever disclosing, always leaving everything at the border between intelligibility and sensibility, between madness and reasoning, between poetry and the thing in itself. After the depiction of Mário Peixoto's person and having delved into the film's production history and survival, perhaps it is now time for one to look at the film itself so as to get a clearer picture of why the film attained its status and how Peixoto managed to leave an unforgettable mark on Brazilian cinema. The plot in Limite is rather simple and revolves around 3 people on a boat, a man and 2 women, that got lost at sea, having almost run out of their provisions. While they bear no relation whatsoever with one another, and initially the viewer is kept in darkness regarding that aspect and their past, the movie slowly takes the time to portray their lives prior to the moment which assembled them all on the sea, through flashbacks, one at a time, whilst showcasing the desperation shared by all on the boat in between, a despondency that isn't as much related to their current status of hungry, thirsty castaways as it is with their perspective on life and their doomed course in it. With the soundtrack comprised of music from Prokofiev, Stravinsky, Ravel, Debussy, Borodin, César Franck and Erik Satie, Limite might be adequately described as a tragedy. However, unlike the typical melodramatic or sentimental tragedy one would expect from the period, perhaps it would be more suitably described as a cosmic tragedy for the lack of a better expression, displaying by means of its characters a strong existential facet, with a fully fledged pessimistic strain that is destined to appeal to viewers who have pondered on the meaning of existence and the depths of darkness inherent in the human condition, those who have reflected during the heights of despair in which one occasionally finds oneself, and the overwhelming silence returned to the doubts and questions projected on the world, the yearning for eternity and the unspoken constraints of self-manifestation amidst impermanence, the bitter and inevitable pangs of passion, the futile attempts to grasp, seize and retain the nature of things in themselves. In the end, the limits of our body, mind and universe, ineffable in its dark, chilling and apathetic indifference. As Saulo Pereira de Melo has so eloquently construed, Limite is a requiem that discloses the exact nature of the finite human condition facing the infinite. It's a clamor and a lament that allows us to understand, not intellectually or discursively, but deep down in one's heart, in the deep abyss of self. Instantaneous, moving, disquieting, the immense mystery of the human condition, the fundamental limitation of man facing the infinite. Limite is pure anguish. Limite can hardly be taken as a narrative film as mentioned earlier, since its 3 storylines are quite elementary, some would even call it schematic, For it is through the visual concatenation and rhythm that the film finds the motion and expression to thrust itself not only forward but outward too. For those reasons, the film attains a certain resistance to description that may elude those not yet familiar with it and which may come across it only by hearing about it in second hand, a contact that will inevitably be reductive and unfair to the breadth of the work. According to Peixoto himself, his film provides an experience that is inadequately transcribed to words. To him, language is unable to carry the actuality of its ideas. The film was made to be felt, essentially, and this aspect brings the work closer to a mystical strain akin to the ecstatic or meta-conceptual understanding found in all religious currents, whether it is the Christian mystics, the Jewish Kabbalists, Islamic Sufis, Hindu Advaitas, or Zen Buddhists. As spectators, we are at once advised to submit to its images as anguished chords of a synthetic and pure language of cinema, and bearing that in mind, the film can be said to possess a better resemblance towards later poetic and introspective creations such as Hiroshima Mon Amour, Sans Soleil, The Tree of Life, Wild Strawberries, or Zerkalo, for example. With this film, Peixoto intended to demonstrate that man is forever unable to overcome this condition that shackles him on Earth. He has the human limit of possibilities. He can fly, he can do this and that, descend to the depths of sea, but sooner or later he must return to the surface of the earth. Time as well is illusory, incredibly deceptive. Looking at a clock, what is it saying? One more, one more, one more. In reality, the clock does not say that, we just don't hear it right. It is saying in fact, one less, one less, one less. Time does not exist. It has been fabricated. Man invented the clock, the division of months, the division of years, all those things. And the human body grows old because it must do, it is merely physiological. But not time. Time is an illusory thing, it does not exist. That is what I aim to prove in Limite, and I believe I have succeeded. His argument therefore is extended to our self-imposed agony, for man has unwittingly handcuffed himself by creating time, hoping that it would help him cope with the fact that the world exists independently of him, since nature is infinite and hence timeless, at no point worrying about the powerlessness evoked on such a trifling entity as man. To put it more succinctly, for Peixoto it's as simple as this: humanity passes, but the world remains. Peixoto described his film at one point as meticulously precise as invisible wheels of a clock, and as a desperate scream, one that a viewer may acknowledge as systematized in the language of cinema in a aesthetically rhyming fashion, disregarding however a potential intellectual approach to it, as it aimed to stir the viewer from an emotional standpoint alternatively. The movie does not desire to analyze, it displays, it projects itself as a tuning fork, a pitch, a resonance of time itself, he said, and in there lies perhaps the decisive aspect of its allure, which doubtlessly helped formulate and perpetuate its status as the defining cinematic creation of Brazilian cinema, a film that places itself above temporal circumscription, beyond trends and fads, following none, seeking none, but certain nonetheless of its universal appeal once looked at, and restrained by social, cultural, or stylistic conventions, by touching upon something very deep, no doubt perplexing, but recognized by all as inherently present in the kernel of human experience. So, how does Limite achieve its goal? What are the particular elements in the film which, arranged by careful hands, relay the artist's vision? What are the crucial ways and manners in which its personal offer is presented as an intimate reflection of Peixoto's mind? These are naturally manifold, variegated in its tone and design, but nevertheless resting in a harmonic assembly, aiding in the apprehension of the film as a superbly creative work, and some deserve to be mentioned individually and inspected in more detail. Limite, for example, is notorious for its use of flashbacks, its recursive temporal leaps between past and present, a stylistic device that is put to use as a sharp bridge into the character's subjective perception. One will find as well an offbeat use of focus to either draw attention as expected or more creatively to express the disorientation and daze induced in its characters. Plus, one will find the application of Dutch angles, a visual technique borrowed from German expressionism with the intent of describing psychological agitation, not to mention a fondness for generally unexpected angles and incredibly odd perspectives in its plentiful myriad shots. Together with the other examples such as the negative footage, a surprising approach of startling nature, which further enhances the sense of unease by portraying an inverted apprehension of the world, meaning the distortion of one's habitual perception as related to their own personal experience, the table is then set for a highly effective and unforgettable visual tableau. It should be noticed, for example, the tiny details of highly symbolical relevance that are featured throughout, such as how the feeling of being trapped without escape is represented by the window grill at the sewing shop where one of the women used to work, as if still imprisoned despite having escaped earlier from jail. Or how the man's utter feeling of weariness, displacement in an inadequate and hostile environment, and perhaps even hunger whilst lost at sea, is likened to a fish gasping to breathe whilst laying on the ground after being fished and awaiting its purchase by one of the female characters of the film. One sequence in particular impresses with its sheer beauty and understated evocation of the fleeting nature of infancy and its innocence, portraying one of the women coming across a child playing with dog puppies by the dirt road, both the human infant and the canines appearing in an early stage of their lives, only to find the camera dolling and panning to a tiny dandelion in the grass, a plant known for its delicate seed head that gets easily dispersed by the wind, no doubt a commentary on the ephemerality of childhood. The associative character of the editing is displayed even through simple comparisons and overlays such as the scissor blades and the newspaper, or the fusion between the moving locomotive and the wheel of the sewing machine, leading to a scene which by itself bears a significant mesmerizing quality through the gorgeous and slightly surreal macro shots in which it is structured. Or just a depiction of slanted trees on a hill slope, akin to man attempting to stand straight despite its existence in an oblique world of adversities, all of which confer to the film an incredibly rich tapestry of meaning and interpretation, not to mention a clearly defined poetic atmosphere to it as well. Another compelling aspect, the remarkable landscape photography, is at times reminiscent of Bergman's Summer with Monica, perhaps one of the greatest masterclasses in that subject, by the hands of Gunnar Fischer, but in Limite, the dominant sense one gets from the environmental framing and presentation is one of dreadful isolation, even amidst the hypnotic beauty of the natural world. Indeed, in Limite there's a keen eye for nature and its multifarious genres, with shots often encompassing and focusing on trees, shrubs, flowers or grass, something which would have been made even more apparent had the initial idea of permeating the film with sounds from the natural world such as wind, waves breaking in a shoreline, rain, or leaves rustling with a breeze had been implemented. As a curiosity, one shot in particular brings to mind Dovzhenko's influential 1930 film, Earth, explored in a previous video, with the flowing grace of grass caressed by the wind showcasing a similar naturalistic eye, and another one appearing to predate Tarkovsky's naturalistic contemplation, whilst bearing in mind that the observation in Limite appears more inclined to reveal the endless pervasion and extension of nature in contrast with man's limited existential assertion. In Limite, it is found as well a strong appreciation for lingering shots, that is, shots in which the camera captures a narrative space and there it remains, even in the absence of a character which has already left the frame and action, a visual take on the elapsing reality of its narrative world that can often be found on films crafted by conscientious and mature filmmakers and which substantiates the sustained existence of its physical framework beyond the confines of human existence. The alarmed psychological disposition discussed earlier is deftly enhanced by the film's cinematography, no doubt, but its montage plays an essential part in it as well, with examples such as the dizzying pace of the shots in certain scenes, the overlap or defragmentation of sequences, the contrast between symbols, objects and individuals, or by resorting to repetition to directly emphasize a certain aspect, such as the multiple leaps toward the fountain, suggestive of the parching throats and dehydration of the lost characters, or the anguished screams of the man that succeed one another rapidly once he reaches the pinnacle of his agony after the fateful meeting with the husband of his beloved. Additionally, the fact that there are almost no titles throughout the film, an unusual scheme for the filmmaking output of the era, together with the sober, meticulous, austere and refined delivery of the cast performances, could be said to be unexpectedly modern. Unlike most productions of the era, there are seldom any exaggerated gestures or theatricality from the actors. Their motion is routinely measured, composed, and precise, following D.W. Griffith's belief in the maximum signification of minimal gesticulation. Another layer of realism, and perhaps vanguardism, is the lack of makeup and the extensive use of outdoors and of real, habited places, instead of sets, which suitably place Limite in a differentiated position regarding early filmmaking pieces. Beyond that, and pertaining more directly to the title, there's a clear sense of limitation both in terms of storytelling, with its characters appearing confined in either a depressing, bitter marriage, an oppressive life devoid of certainty, or an unsolvable love triangle, but in a visual sense too, with many of the film's shots showcasing regularly visual limits that restrain and contain its spaces and characters through hedges, fences, walls, cables, rails, and other structures. Despite this, as mentioned earlier, the clearest constraint in Limite is related to the characters' existential woes and ennui, and this is observable whilst each one recalls their worldly condition which led them to the boat and to losing themselves at sea. In the flashbacks of all three of them, there is always a moment when all hope seems to be lost for them, and they all seem to relinquish their will to fight back against the misfortune plunged upon them or cease to believe in a possible resolution. Yet, it is especially in the sequence of the man's flashback that one attains a vivid, thorough, and poignant understanding of real helplessness, once he collapses by the barbed wire fence after crying out for help into a nearby home. Peixoto positions the camera, and therefore the viewer, inside that dwelling, effectively making him the resident of the habitation, facing the man frontally, a man who sees his pleas being utterly ignored and which eventually drops in the ground in front of him, decisively vanquished by the indifference of the world, a piercing image that is only reinforced by the apparent continuation of the lives around him, exemplified through the seaside village dwellers and fishermen that proceed with their lives seemingly unaware of the man's acute suffering. On top of that, there is another image that contains such devastating power that one feels compelled to particularly mention it, which is both the prologue and epilogue of the film, more precisely the shot featuring the black vultures. As the name indicates, black vultures are birds that feed on carrion, in other words, putrid, rotten flesh of dead animals, and which are captured in Limite's opening whilst feeding on top of a rock formation, and thence one is immediately introduced to the theme of death. But the fact that they are both the first and the last image in the film seems to convey the impression of circularity on the witnessed events, confining the lives and characters seen on the screen at the start and the end, as if implying that before them there is death, and awaiting them in the final boundary there is death as well. In other words, nothingness precedes and outlasts their existence, an existence which at the end of the day appears as a tiny reprieve, a mere temporary break on the endless continuum of nothingness, which is the inevitable outcome of their living vacation. At the epilogue, the spectator sees the black vultures finishing their meal and flying away from the peak after they're done, leaving one to assume that there are only bones left of what was once a living organism, bones that will disintegrate and become dust, what they had once been already. A fathomlessly dark, some would say nihilistic take on our existence for sure, and regardless of its truth, seldom has a film dared to cross into such bleak territory and with such focused, consistent sincerity, crafting in the process a direct connection between creator and viewer that transcends the medium upon which it has been laid. In a filmmaking era known mostly for its melodramas, historical epics, lightweight comedies, propaganda films, and other generally big studio productions, Limite is a triumph of personal artistry, an experience of intensely personal purpose, a clamor against the tyrannical if artificial rule of time and death, a call for transcendental awareness and emancipation amidst the suffering of ordinary life and its apparent meaninglessness. Despite almost being lost forever, the concerted efforts of a few select individuals managed to reclaim the film from the lightless and bottomless tomb of oblivion, and for those reasons, any cinephile should seek to lay their eyes at least once in their lifetime on this exceptional piece of filmmaking. Limite has been released on a special Blu-ray and DVD combo pack, as the second issue of Martin Scorsese's WCinema project, together with 5 additional culturally significant cinematic masterworks from all over the world, The link for it shall be available on the description. If you have enjoyed this essay, feel free to like, comment, share or subscribe to the channel if you're interested in film art from all eras and countries. The video essays presented on this channel are quite stimulating to produce, yet incredibly time consuming, therefore I am grateful for the continued support demonstrated so far with each and every upload. Thank you for listening and see you next time.